The moment your last breath leaves your body, you make a choice that will determine whether you ascend to realms of unimaginable light or become trapped in a nightmare of your own making. Edgar Cayce, the most documented psychic of the 20th century, spent decades mapping the soul's journey after death through thousands of trance readings. What he discovered will shatter everything you think you know about dying. There's a mistake so catastrophic, so fundamentally terrifying that it traps millions of souls in a state worse than death itself. They become prisoners of their own consciousness, unable to move forward, unable to go back, caught in a twilight existence that can last for decades or even centuries. And here's what will keep you awake at night. This mistake isn't made by evil people or lost souls. It's made by ordinary people, good people, people just like you who simply didn't understand what happens the moment consciousness separates from flesh. Today I'm going to reveal the soul's most terrifying mistake right after leaving the body. According to Edgar Cayce's extraordinary revelations, by the end of this exploration, you'll understand why this mistake is so common, why it's so devastating, and most importantly, how to ensure you never make it yourself. Because what I'm about to share isn't just about death, it's about consciousness, reality, and the invisible forces that shape your existence right now, in this very moment. Edgar Cayce didn't just theorize about the afterlife, he traveled there. While in deep trance states, his consciousness would journey beyond the physical realm, exploring dimensions that exist beyond our normal perception. He would return with detailed descriptions of what souls experience immediately after death, mapping territories of consciousness that most of us will only encounter when we die. But some souls never make it past the first territory. They become stuck, trapped, earthbound. And the reason they become trapped reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Here's what Cayce discovered that changes everything about how you understand death. The moment your soul separates from your body, you don't automatically ascend to some heavenly realm. You don't immediately find yourself in the presence of divine light. Instead, you find yourself in a reality that perfectly mirrors the contents of your own mind. Every thought you've harbored, every attachment you've formed, every fear you've carried becomes the lens through which you experience your new existence. Think about this for a moment. Right now, as you're listening to these words, your mind is filled with thoughts, concerns, desires, attachments. You're thinking about your job, your relationships, your problems, your plans for tomorrow. You're carrying the weight of your habits, your addictions, your emotional patterns. Now imagine that when you die, instead of leaving all of this behind, you become completely immersed in it. You don't view reality outwardly anymore, you view it inwardly. And everything you see is filtered through everything you've stored within yourself. This is where the terrifying mistake begins. The soul that has spent a lifetime attached to material existence, obsessed with physical pleasures, consumed by earthly concerns, finds itself unable to let go when the body dies. Instead of recognizing that death is a transition, a doorway to higher realms of consciousness, the soul clings desperately to what it has always known. It refuses to release its grip on the physical world. And in that refusal, it creates its own prison. Cayce encountered thousands of these trapped souls during his psychic journeys. He found them wandering in confusion, unable to understand why no one could see them, why no one would talk to them, why they felt so isolated and alone. These earthbound spirits, as Cayce called them, had made the fundamental mistake of remaining attached to their earthly desires and longings. They were held in an earthbound state, unable to progress to higher spiritual realms, living in their own personal nightmare without any idea how to escape. But here's what makes this mistake so terrifying. It's not just about being stuck. These earthbound souls actively seek out living people who share their vibrations, their addictions, their emotional patterns. They attach themselves to the living, feeding off their energy, amplifying their problems, encouraging their destructive behaviors. If you've ever wondered why some addictions feel so impossible to break, why some negative thought patterns seem to have a life of their own, why some people seem to carry burdens that feel heavier than their circumstances warrant, you might be witnessing the influence of earthbound souls who made this catastrophic mistake. The process unfolds with heartbreaking predictability. The soul leaves the body but immediately begins behaving as if nothing has changed. It goes about its daily routine, trying to interact with family members, attempting to continue the same patterns it followed in life. But slowly, the terrible reality begins to dawn. No one responds to their presence. No one acknowledges their attempts at communication. The soul becomes increasingly frustrated, confused, angry. Why are they being ignored? What did they do wrong? Why won't anyone talk to them? Some souls spend years in this state of denial. They convince themselves that they're still alive, that everyone else is simply being cruel or distant. They create elaborate mental constructs to explain their isolation, never accepting the truth that they have died and need to move forward. The desperation grows. The loneliness becomes unbearable. And still they refuse to let go of their earthly attachments. What makes this mistake even more tragic is that it often traps souls who were genuinely good people in life. The loving mother who can't bear to leave her children, the devoted husband who refuses to abandon his grieving wife, the person so identified with their physical body, their possessions, their earthly identity that they cannot conceive of existence without these things. Their love, their devotion, their very humanity becomes the chain that binds them to a realm they should have transcended. Cayce revealed that the soul's immediate post-death environment is entirely determined by the mental and spiritual attitudes cultivated during life. If you've filled your mind with fear, resentment, materialism, and attachment, you will find yourself trapped in realms that reflect these internal states. The dimensions that immediately surround the earth, what Cayce called the mental realms, become a mirror of your consciousness. You don't leave behind your attitudes when you die. You inhabit them. You become them. This is why preparation for death must begin now, while you're still alive. The soul that wants to find the light after death must first find and recognize the light during earthly existence. If you don't cultivate spiritual awareness, if you don't learn to detach from material concerns, if you don't develop your capacity for love and self-sacrifice during life, you will not suddenly gain these abilities when your body dies. The patterns you've built, the attachments you've formed, The mental habits you've reinforced will continue to operate in your consciousness after death, potentially trapping you in states of confusion and suffering. The terrifying truth that Cayce discovered is that death doesn't automatically make us wise. It doesn't instantly grant us spiritual understanding. It doesn't magically free us from our limitations. Death simply removes the physical body while leaving consciousness intact with all its patterns, all its attachments, all its fears and desires. And if those patterns are focused on earthly existence, the soul may spend decades or even centuries trapped in the mental realms, unable to progress to the higher dimensions that await those who have learned to let go. Sundasamut. But there's something even more disturbing about this mistake. The longer a soul remains earthbound, the more it loses touch with its divine nature. These trapped spirits begin to feed off the energy of the living, becoming increasingly parasitic, increasingly desperate. They attach themselves to people with similar vibrations, similar addictions, similar emotional wounds. They drain their hosts while amplifying the very problems that attracted them in the first place. This creates a horrifying cycle that Cayce witnessed repeatedly in his trance journeys. The earthbound soul, desperate for any form of connection, any taste of the physical sensations it craves, begins to influence living people in increasingly destructive ways. The alcoholic spirit seeks out those struggling with drinking, amplifying their cravings, making recovery nearly impossible. The soul trapped by sexual obsession attaches to those with similar compulsions, feeding their addictions while growing stronger from the borrowed energy. Think about someone you know who seems to carry more darkness than their circumstances should warrant. Someone whose negative patterns feel almost supernatural in their persistence. Someone whose addictions seem to have a life of their own, resisting every attempt at healing or change. According to Cayce's discoveries, you might be witnessing the influence of an earthbound soul who made the catastrophic mistake of refusing to let go after death. The most chilling aspect of this mistake is how reasonable it seems in the moment. The soul that has just left its body doesn't feel dead. It feels fully conscious, fully aware, fully itself. The idea of moving towards some unknown light, of releasing everything familiar, of trusting in something beyond physical existence, feels terrifying. So the soul makes what seems like the logical choice. It holds on. It fights to maintain connection with the world it knows. It refuses to surrender to the unknown. But this refusal to surrender is exactly what creates the trap. Cayce discovered that the universe operates on precise spiritual laws just as it operates on physical laws. One of these laws is that consciousness must evolve, must progress, must move from lower to higher dimensions. When a soul refuses this natural progression, it violates a fundamental principle of existence. It becomes like a river trying to flow backward, creating turbulence and chaos instead of the natural flow toward greater consciousness. The souls that successfully transition after death are those who have learned during life to trust in something greater than their physical existence. They've cultivated the ability to let go, to surrender, to move toward the unknown with faith rather than fear. When death comes, they recognize it as a doorway rather than a wall. They feel the pull toward higher dimensions and they follow it willingly, even though it means releasing everything they've known. But for the soul trapped by earthly attachments, this pull toward higher consciousness feels like annihilation. The ego, which has spent a lifetime identifying with the body, with possessions, with earthly relationships, cannot conceive of existence without these things. So it fights, it struggles, it creates elaborate mental constructs to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed. And in that struggle, it becomes imprisoned in its own consciousness. Cayce described encountering souls who had been trapped in this state for centuries. Spirits from the Civil War era still wandering battlefields, unable to accept that the war was over, that their bodies were long since dust. Victorian-era souls still trying to manage households that existed only in their memory. Ancient spirits clinging to temples and sacred sites, convinced they were still serving gods that the world had forgotten. The tragedy of these encounters is that these souls often retained their basic goodness, their fundamental humanity. They weren't evil beings condemned to hell. They were ordinary people who had made a single catastrophic mistake at the moment of their greatest transition. They had chosen attachment over surrender, familiarity over growth, the known over the unknown. And that choice had condemned them to decades or centuries of confusion, isolation, and spiritual stagnation. What makes this mistake even more terrifying is how it reflects patterns we can observe in our current lives. How many times have you clung to a relationship that was clearly over because letting go felt too painful? How many times have you remained in a job, a situation, a mindset that no longer served you because change felt too frightening? How many times have you chosen the familiar prison over the unknown freedom? These patterns of attachment and resistance that we practice every day of our lives don't simply disappear when we die, they intensify. The soul that has spent a lifetime avoiding difficult transitions, refusing to let go of what no longer serves, will face the ultimate test when death arrives. And if it fails that test, if it chooses attachment over surrender one final time, the consequences are far more severe than any earthly mistake. Cayce revealed that time moves differently in the mental realms where these earthbound souls become trapped. What feels like years to them might be decades in earthly time. They experience a distorted sense of reality where memories become more real than the present moment. They live in loops of their own creation, replaying the same thoughts, the same desires, the same fears over and over again. The most heartbreaking cases Cayce encountered were parents who couldn't let go of their children. Mothers who had died but refused to move on because they couldn't bear to leave their young ones behind. Fathers who had passed but remained earthbound, desperately trying to protect and guide families who could no longer sense their presence. Their love, which should have been their greatest strength, became their greatest weakness when it transformed into attachment that prevented spiritual progress. These loving souls would hover around their families, trying desperately to help, to communicate, to continue their earthly roles as protectors and providers. But their attempts to help often created more harm than good. Their desperate energy would manifest as unexplained anxiety in their loved ones, as resistance to moving forward, as an inability to properly grieve and heal. The very people they were trying to protect became prisoners of their earthbound love. The children of these earthbound parents often grew up feeling watched, feeling burdened by invisible expectations, feeling guilty for living their own lives. They might experience unexplained fears, sudden mood changes, or a persistent sense that someone was always present but just out of sight. The earthbound parents' refusal to let go created a psychic weight that could influence their family for generations. This is why Cayce emphasized that true love sometimes requires the ultimate act of letting go. The soul that genuinely loves its earthly family must be willing to release them, to trust in the larger spiritual processes at work, to move toward its own spiritual evolution so that it can eventually help from higher dimensions rather than remaining trapped in lower ones. The mistake isn't in loving. The mistake is in allowing love to become possessive attachment that prevents spiritual growth. The difference between divine love and earthly attachment becomes the determining factor in whether a soul ascends to higher realms or becomes trapped in the mental dimensions surrounding Earth. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this terrifying mistake is how it creates what Cayce described as spiritual parasitism. The earthbound soul, cut off from the natural flow of divine energy, becomes increasingly desperate for any form of sustenance. It begins to feed off the life force of the living, attaching itself to people whose emotional patterns match its own unfulfilled desires. These attachments aren't random. They're magnetically drawn to specific vibrations. The soul who died while struggling with alcoholism will seek out those battling the same addiction. The spirit trapped by sexual obsession will attach to individuals with similar compulsions. The earthbound consciousness consumed by rage will gravitate toward those carrying similar anger. This creates a horrifying symbiotic relationship where the living person's struggles are amplified while the earthbound soul feeds off the emotional energy generated by those very struggles. What's truly chilling is that most people have no idea this is happening. They experience their addiction, their anger, their compulsions as entirely their own. They fight against patterns that feel impossibly strong, not realizing they're battling not just their own consciousness, but the desperate attachment of a soul that refuses to move on. The person trying to quit drinking suddenly finds their cravings intensified beyond anything they've experienced before. The individual working to overcome sexual addiction discovers urges that seem to come from somewhere else entirely. The person attempting to heal their anger finds rage surfacing that feels ancient, primal, not quite their own. Cayce described encountering earthbound souls who had been feeding off the living for so long that they had forgotten their own identity. They had become like spiritual vampires existing only to draw energy from others, no longer remembering who they were in life or why they had originally refused to move toward the light. These entities had made the initial mistake of choosing attachment over surrender, but that single choice had led them down a path of increasing darkness and desperation. The process of spiritual degradation that follows this mistake unfolds with terrifying inevitability. First, the soul refuses to let go of earthly attachments. Then it becomes confused and disoriented when the physical world no longer responds to its presence. Next, it begins seeking any form of connection or sensation, leading to parasitic attachment to the living. Finally, it loses touch with its divine nature entirely, becoming a shadow of its former self, existing only to feed off the energy of others. This degradation explains why some earthbound attachments feel so malevolent, so destructive. It's not that these souls were evil in life. It's that their refusal to make the natural transition after death has twisted their consciousness into something increasingly desperate and harmful. The loving mother who couldn't let go of her children might eventually become a possessive force that prevents them from forming healthy relationships. The devoted husband who refused to leave his wife might transform into an obsessive presence that makes it impossible for her to move forward and heal. Cayce revealed that these earthbound souls often cluster together in what he called the lower astral realms. They form communities of the lost, reinforcing each other's delusions, sharing their methods of drawing energy from the living. These gatherings become breeding grounds for increasingly sophisticated forms of spiritual parasitism. The souls learn from each other how to attach more effectively, how to influence human behavior more subtly, how to feed off emotional energy without being detected. The most experienced of these earthbound entities can influence multiple people simultaneously, creating networks of attachment that span families, communities, even entire regions. They become puppet masters of human dysfunction, orchestrating addiction, depression, rage, and despair across wide populations. What appears to be purely psychological or social problems often have these hidden spiritual dimensions that conventional approaches completely miss. But here's what makes this mistake even more tragic. Every moment that a soul remains earthbound, it's missing opportunities for genuine spiritual growth and evolution. While it clings desperately to shadows of its former existence, other souls are progressing through dimensions of increasing light and consciousness. They're learning, growing, preparing for their next incarnation with greater wisdom and capability. The earthbound soul, meanwhile, becomes increasingly lost, increasingly disconnected from its divine nature, increasingly trapped in patterns of desperation and need. Cayce discovered that some of these trapped souls had been earthbound for so long that they had forgotten the very possibility of spiritual progression. When he encountered them during his trance journeys and tried to guide them toward the light, they would resist violently, unable to conceive of existence beyond their desperate attachment to the physical realm. They had become so identified with their prison that freedom itself felt like annihilation. The time distortion in these lower dimensions makes the suffering even more intense. What might be decades of earthly time could feel like centuries to the trapped consciousness. The soul experiences endless repetition of the same fears, the same desires, the same desperate attempts to connect with a world that no longer recognizes its presence. It's like being stuck in a nightmare that never ends, where every attempt to wake up only leads deeper into the dream. This explains why some locations feel haunted, why certain places carry an atmosphere of sadness or oppression that sensitive individuals can immediately detect. These are areas where earthbound souls have gathered, creating pockets of trapped consciousness that influence the emotional atmosphere of the physical space. The old hospital where desperate souls refuse to accept their death. the battlefield where soldiers remain convinced the war continues, the family home where parents can't bear to leave their children behind. These concentrations of earthbound energy don't just affect the locations themselves. They influence everyone who enters these spaces, creating unexplained feelings of sadness, anxiety, or oppression. Visitors might experience sudden mood changes, unexpected fears, or the distinct sensation of being watched. Children, who are naturally more sensitive to spiritual energies, often refuse to enter certain rooms or become inexplicably upset in these locations. The most sophisticated earthbound entities learn to mask their presence, to influence human behavior so subtly that their victims never suspect external interference. They whisper suggestions that feel like the person's own thoughts. They amplify existing emotional patterns until they become overwhelming compulsions. They create synchronicities and coincidences that push their hosts deeper into the very behaviors that feed the earthbound soul's desperate hunger. A person struggling with gambling addiction might suddenly encounter unexpected opportunities to gamble, chance meetings with other addicts, financial windfalls that seem to justify taking bigger risks. What appears to be unfortunate coincidence or personal weakness might actually be the orchestrated influence of an earthbound soul that feeds off the emotional energy generated by the gambling compulsion. The person fights against their addiction while unknowingly battling a spiritual parasite that grows stronger every time they give in to their urges. The earthbound soul's influence can extend across generations, creating family patterns of dysfunction that seem to have no logical explanation. The same addictions, the same emotional problems, the same destructive relationships appear repeatedly in bloodlines, as if some invisible force were ensuring that the patterns continue. Traditional psychology might label this genetic predisposition or learned behavior, but Cayce's discoveries suggest a far more disturbing explanation. These generational patterns often begin with a family member who made the terrifying mistake of refusing to move on after death. Their earthbound presence becomes an invisible anchor that holds the entire family system in patterns of dysfunction. Each generation struggles with the same issues not because they're genetically predetermined, but because they're influenced by the same trapped consciousness that refuses to release its hold on the family line. The children in these families often report sensing invisible presences, feeling watched or guided by forces they can't see. They might have vivid dreams of deceased relatives who seem strangely possessive or controlling. They experience unexplained fears, sudden behavioral changes, or compulsions that don't match their personality or circumstances. What loving families interpret as the protective presence of departed relatives might actually be the desperate attachment of souls who have made the catastrophic mistake of refusing to progress after death. Breaking free from these earthbound influences requires understanding that goes far beyond conventional therapeutic approaches. The living person must recognize that their struggles might have spiritual dimensions that purely psychological interventions cannot address. They must learn to distinguish between their own authentic thoughts and feelings and the whispered suggestions of desperate entities seeking to feed off their energy. This recognition process can be terrifying in itself. Many people prefer to believe that their struggles are entirely their own, rather than face the possibility that invisible forces might be influencing their behavior. The idea that deceased souls might be attached to them, feeding off their emotional energy, feels too disturbing to contemplate. Yet Cayce's discoveries suggest that millions of people are unknowingly carrying these spiritual parasites, fighting battles they cannot win because they don't understand the true nature of their opponent. Now you understand the soul's most terrifying mistake and why Cayce's revelation should transform how you live today. The choice between attachment and surrender isn't just about death. It's about every moment of your existence right now. Start practicing the art of letting go while you still have time. Cultivate spiritual awareness. Release your grip on what no longer serves you. Because the patterns you build today will determine whether you ascend to unimaginable light or become trapped in a nightmare of your own making when that final moment arrives.